Hi and welcome to the Financial Fox. Today we will be diving into the future of technology, looking at the main drivers shaping up the space and the challenges around data privacy, cybersecurity, decentralization and scalability as the technology evolves. We will also be breaking down the facts and myths about quantum computers. Blockchain's mission is to establish an unprecedented level of trust in various situations and transactions, eliminating the middleman and making systems more secure and efficient. A few years back, decentralization wasn't a common term. Today is equivalent to empowerment. So we won't only be discussing blockchain, but also its future. With quantum computers set to make their entry into the market over the coming years, it is vital to understand how this would affect blockchains and related applications. So to discuss all of this and much more, joining us today from the US is a very special guest and tech innovator, Tate, the founder of DigiByte, one of the most secured blockchain out there. Hi Jared, how are you?
Good, doing fantastic. How are you?
Yeah, it's all good here in London. It's a bit cold, but you know, we are always coping with the winter.
Well, it's nice and warm here in Texas. It's about 80 degrees. So,
really?
Yeah.
Which,
I don't know what that is in centigrade, but I know it's warm. So
yeah, but that's good. So let's start this interview with basically your latest and highly anticipated project, which is the book of the year for all crypto and tech enthusiastic, Blockchain 2035.
yes, it's we've shipped all of our pre-orders. It's out there. It's over 500 pages long. It covers a broad range of subjects, and we believe it's the most in-depth book on blockchain that's ever been written. You can go to blockchain2035.com and you can get a hardback, or you can go to Amazon and get a paperback. And there's also ebooks available, and we're working on the audiobook. So it's a project that's been underway for since 2015. We started writing about 16 months ago, and it's fantastic that we finally have it done and we have it out.
So what I wanted to understand, is this a book for experts or is for the layman as well?
It's absolutely for the layperson. I mean, it's for everybody. What we do is we take people from basically zero knowledge and information. We introduce some basic concepts, and then we expand on that through the whole book. So the book's divided into 4 parts. Part 1 is basically the basics and an introduction. Part 2 is what we call the philosophy and the philosophers. So we talk about the fact that blockchain just didn't pop up out of nowhere. It's actually the evolution of some very genius mathematicians and cryptographers over the last 70 years. Part 3 is what we talk about the application. So we go through and we survey existing projects and protocols, how to evaluate them, how to what to look for. Concepts like the market cap fallacy, where you can't really trust market cap as an accurate indicator of long-term success of a project. And then finally, part 4 is the future, which is where we get into quantum computing, future geopolitical, conflicts, etc. So it's a very dynamic book. It's got a very wide range of topics. It's not just about DigiByte. I would probably say 5% of the book's about DigiByte. The other 95% is just the broad scope of the technology and applications at large. So it's very, very, we had a great time writing it. I co-authored it with one of my business partners, who's a former intelligence analyst. So between my technical perspective and his geopolitical kind of analyst perspective, it's a very dynamic approach to a book.
So, but basically it's not just blockchain, it's taking the wider, if I understand correctly, it's taking the wider approach of basically the internet, the evolution of the internet, the next internet age and the new digital economy, isn't it?
Yes, absolutely. It's a very broad picture. So we've got a lot of the historical context, as well as current problems with vulnerabilities within the internet itself, problems with a lot of cybersecurity vulnerabilities, and then how properly applied blockchain technology can help re-architect the internet for a much brighter future for humanity.
Okay, picking up on this, I mean, you have often mentioned in your interviews the power of decentralization and the importance of cybersecurity. Maybe can you expand on the key problems that blockchain have solved?
You know, so we go into this, I believe it's in chapter 6. So what we talk about are the 3 Achilles heels of the internet, basically the 3 single points of failure that could actually one day potentially, and have in the past, led to entire portions and chunks of the internet basically being taken offline. We talk a lot about what happened in 2016 with the Mira botnet, and when half the internet in the United States was knocked out for almost a day. Because one of the first problems is an over-reliance on something that are known as domain name servers. So for instance, when you go and you type in, for instance, blockchain2035.com or digibyte.io, that's just basically a word-based name that points to a server. Well, those records are kept on what's called a DNS server, and there's only a handful of these servers worldwide, right? And so it's a very centralized single point of failure. And so if those are attacked, entire chunks of the internet can be brought offline. So we go into detail about that and how blockchain can fix it. The other one we talk about is Ssl and Tsl certificates, which for those that don't know, if you ever go to your like banking website or crypto website and you see that little lock icon on your browser, well, that cryptography is actually very similar to what happens with, like, for instance, Bitcoin or DigiByte private keys. The difference is those certificates are issued by a handful of companies. And quite often those certificates are actually what are used by nation states to attack each other. So it's another single point of failure. So we go into that and we explain how, you know, blockchain can fix that. We also talk about the over-reliance on passwords and how passwords are outdated and obsolete and can be replaced with proper blockchain authentication. Because going back a little bit before that, you know, a lot of people think that blockchain just popped up out of nowhere. Well, it didn't. We like to describe a blockchain like a car, right? So in a car, you have all these different subsystems. You have an engine, a transmission, the windows, the air conditioning. Well, just like a car with different subcomponents, a blockchain has different subcomponents. And a lot of those different components are based upon mathematical innovations going back as far as the 1940s, 1960s, and 1970s. And a lot of these innovations were the most closely guarded secrets of Western governments for cryptography and intelligence purposes. And those are the components that are actually the real backbone of what we call a blockchain today. So it's not something that just popped up out of nowhere. So we go and we explain that, and that's something that we've never seen anybody do before because most people just quite don't understand that. But you know, once again, we take people from basically no understanding, and we bring them up through the history. So, yeah.
Okay, so, but I mean, many analysts are still concerned about what is known as the blockchain trilemma. So the fact that the 3 key elements of blockchain, so decentralization, scalability, and security, cannot all be improved at the same time. Is this where quantum computing comes in?
Well, see, first of all, these analysts don't really understand the technology, and I completely disagree with that assessment because they can. And we have done that, and we have pulled that off. And DigiByte has been out there in the wild for almost 6 years now, and we have increased speed, we have increased scalability, and we have increased security simultaneously. So, you know, I fundamentally do disagree with that.
Okay.
You know, so I don't know what particular analysts are saying that. Typically, those kind of arguments are specifically geared towards Bitcoin. And the issue there is the scalability and the decentralization of Bitcoin has not improved. And in fact, it's gotten worse over the last 5 years, you know, continuously, because you have more mining centralization. There really hasn't been any scalability improvements into the protocol in years, and it doesn't look like there's going to be any time soon. You know, Bitcoin is pretty stuck where it's at. But now when it comes to decentralized blockchain and tech, you know, in general, absolutely you can do all 3 at the same time. Well, for your question on quantum computing, you know, the big issue with quantum computing, and we lead off with this at the beginning. So the very last chapter in our book is called The Quantum Leap. And we wrote an entire chapter dedicated to how quantum computing will most likely affect blockchains. First of all, we don't really know So there are a lot of unknown unknowns. So we can't say anything with certainty, because a lot of the most in-depth and detailed research in this area is a closely guarded secret because it's being funded by nation states. But we do know of a few things, so first of all, to start with, there are no true quantum encryption algorithms that are actually out there in the wild yet because the quantum computing technology isn't there. So it's hard to test. But we do have what are called, quantum resistant algorithms that are being developed around the world. Starting in 2019. So the organization that's responsible for encryption and security standards in the United States, it's called NIST, the National Institute for Science and Technology. They're actually the ones that originally developed SHA-256, which is used in Bitcoin and DigiByte. That was, I think it first started working like 2003 on that. Anyway, they have launched something that they call the post-quantum cryptography standardization process. And they actually have been having an ongoing competition among mathematical researchers that's actually still going on right now. In fact, round 2 of that competition was announced in January 30th of this year. And there's actually a handful of algorithms that are considered quantum computing resistant or quantum proof for quite a while. And so there's actually a lot of development. And there's one algorithm in particular that seems to be leading the pack there. It's called Sphinx Plus. And so we've been looking pretty close at that, is potentially substituting that in and making DigiByte quantum proof well into the future.
Yeah, that was basically my other question, because you have been working so hard to implement all the protocols to make DigiByte one of the most secure blockchain out there. So I was just wondering whether you might thinking about introducing some kind of how quantum computing actually could affect DigiByte, but you basically already answered.
Yeah, but the downside is because that algorithm is much more complex and computationally intensive, it would actually slow down the performance of a core wallet itself because it would take more computing power to process each hash. So there's a trade-off there.
And also something else that I wanted maybe to, I wanted you to expand a little bit was about these deterministic versus probabilistic approach, because we said with blockchain, basically we have a deterministic approach, with quantum we are entering the probabilistic approach. Do you mind maybe to expand a little bit on these and how that could impact technology and, the applications?
Well, I think what you're really getting at here is a formal logic debate, right? But it comes back to, I think, what I said before about the unknown unknowns. Right now you have 2 main types of approaches to quantum computing. So all quantum computers are not the same. A good analogy is, for instance, like D-Wave Systems just sold a 5,000 qubit computer to Los Alamos National Laboratory, which, for those of you who aren't familiar, Los Alamos is where the first nuclear bomb was developed on behalf of the US government. So anything that's happening that's super top secret and innovative and research-wise is there. And that's actually where the world's largest supercomputer is housed as well. So we don't really, it's kind of a black hole. Obviously, it's a closely guarded secret, everything that's happening there. But this 5,000 qubit system could be compared kind of like the difference between a CPU and an ASIC. An ASIC is only good for a specific algorithm and a specific thing. So these D-Wave computers, like this 5,000 qubit system, is only good for specific problems. So whereas Google's approach is creating more of a general purpose quantum computer, which are the ones that, supposedly we should be the most worried about. But they've only been able to achieve about a 50 qubit level of stability. So it's still got a long ways to go. But, we talk about this a lot in the book. At the end of World War II, we as humans, we had the ability to measure weight. We had the ability to measure time. We could measure distance. But the one thing that we couldn't do was measure information. And this all changed when a man by the name of Claude Shannon, who actually worked under Alan Turing in the War Department when they cracked the Nazi Enigma, he wrote this paper called Information Theory. And he's actually the one that came up with the whole idea of bits and bytes and what we know today is like megabytes, gigabytes, terabytes, and the ability to process information. But the key development there that kicked off the digital revolution was the development of the transistor right after that paper, just about, I think, 2 or 3 years later at Bell Laboratories. Now, once the transistor was developed, the digital era kicked off. And, you know, the transistor is just a simple electrical impulse. It's either charged or not charged, on or off. Well, with quantum computing, we have something known as qubits, right? And depending on how many qubits a machine is, it can be more than just on and off. It could be on, off, partially on to the left, partially on to the right. And I guess the easy way to describe this is if you think of a nucleus, because that's kind of what's happening here. You can have different states around the nucleus, and that's how they're effectively creating these quantum computers. But the thing is, there is no standardized equivalent of a transistor yet in the quantum computing realm. So until that moment happens, we don't really know how a lot of this stuff is going to shake out, because effectively every programming language, every architecture, everything that has been built upon since the 1940s in terms of the digital tech stack that we use today, because it's just been iteration on top of iteration, that has to be completely redone from the ground up. So that's going to take a lot of time and a lot of resources. So I guess to re-encase my other point, there's still a lot of unknowns.
Exactly, and what you said basically, all the development around quantum computing has been made basically by governments, by universities. So it's kind of the public sector and the security service, especially in United States and China, is not something where, that is kind of driven by the private funding, like was the blockchain, basically.
Well, yes. And not only that, conducting these quantum computing experiments and building computing or quantum computers is extremely expensive and extremely difficult, because these systems have to be kept in such controlled environments.
Yeah, the temperature has to be so low.
Yes, it has to be super cold, and the slightest vibration can mess it up, and so just to get access to one of these machines to do research, I mean, it can cost $50,000, $100,000 an hour.
Exactly. Do you think quantum computers could be commercialized one day?
I do believe they will. I mean, the cat's out of the bag. The idea and the theory. I mean, look how far we came from 1948 until now. Even from 1948 to 1968, in 20 years, it was an absolutely incredible. I mean, we went from not being able to measure information to putting somebody on the moon in 20 years. So, and none of that would have been possible. The calculations, the electronics, none of that would have been possible without information theory and the transistor, in the spacecraft.
And talking about commercial application of quantum computing, which you think will be the first one to kick off?
Well, it's the first applications are going to be by nation states using it to crack each other's encryption systems. That's why they're building it. So, in terms of commercial, the potential is everywhere. I mean, every industry would greatly beneficial from an exponential increase in computing power. I do believe you're going to see much more, many other systems break before today's existing blockchains. The traditional banking system, traditional other services are going to be broken far before any traditional blockchains are. And, the interesting thing about blockchain is because, this industry is attracting some of the brightest and most intelligent people in the industry, I believe the solutions that are going to fix a lot of the problems for other services are going to come out of this industry. I mean, you're already seeing that with the adoption of two-factor authentication, automated AML, KYC onboarding, things like DigiID. This industry has already been on the cutting edge of a lot of security innovations, and I think that'll continue to happen. And, you already have several blockchain projects working on, quantum proofing their blockchains, like DigiByte.
So basically, the big question if quantum computers will bring the down for the blockchain technology is basically a no from your side.
No, I don't think it will at all. I mean, the technology is already right there, now. Yeah, sure, there might be some hiccups, but, you take the algorithm like the Sphinx Plus, we could swap that out for SHA-256 very rapidly, and I think multiple other blockchains will. And I think blockchains are actually going to be far better off than pretty much any other service out there. So no, I don't think it's going to be a downfall at all. I think it's just going to be a phase. It's going to be an evolution.
Okay.
Just like we've adapted and improvised, we'll continue to do so.
Okay, so another big word, artificial intelligence. What's your thought, what's your take on that, and how you think is going to help the evolution of the Internet 3.0?
Well, we have a whole chapter on artificial intelligence and blockchain in the book. And there's two key takeaways from this. So first of all, what are the biggest problems with AI systems today? The biggest problems are actually the data feeds. If you're feeding an AI engine or an algorithm data that's not been verified, it's not valid, or it's corrupt, you're going to have a lot of problems. And that's actually one of the biggest issues today with AI systems is how do you trust the data inputs? How do you verify that they're valid? How do you verify that they're accurate? So we make the argument that to make a secure AI system that's actually very efficient, you should use blockchain technology to verify and validate and timestamp the data that's going into it. So we call it that blockchain is the rails for artificial intelligence to run on effectively. But more importantly, we actually go to another point, which we have a whole chapter about the history of timekeeping, going back to the 1600s and celestial navigation of the ocean, and the fact that the ability to keep accurate time has actually been a big problem and a closely guarded secret of national security going back to the 1500s, right? And to this day, one of the biggest problems in cryptography and encryption and computing systems is keeping accurate system times. There is no absolute accurate way to keep time, and there's always slight variances. Well, with a blockchain, what you have is the first time in human history that you can keep an accurate record of time and events, right? That immutable ledger. And what you can use is you can use that immutable ledger in time sequencing to actually effectively program in a kill switch for a rogue AI. So if you get to a certain point in time and the AI is not doing what it's supposed to, you can use a smart contract and that timestamp in the future to actually shut down an AI system to keep it from completely going rogue, and destroying humanity. So it's a very fascinating topic to think through.
Yeah, and another topic which is quite hot at the moment is data, obviously, and the control of data and the responsibility of data. I mean, we see many governments, they try to take on board this digital sovereignty, and they are trying to kind of push some guidelines, some rules to shape the data economy to empower users. But my point was more, is this responsibility something that is for the governments, or it lies in the hands of people? What's your view?
Well, once again, we have an entire chapter on this, chapter 2. It's called A Revolution in Ownership. And we make the argument that people should take charge of their own data, their own privacy. And that's super important. And, a blockchain wallet, a DigiByte wallet or a Bitcoin wallet is capable of much more than just storing money. You can use those private keys to secure and store things like a living will or a birth certificate or other important documents to you. And you can basically use those keys to choose to share it with other people or not share it. So we go into detail about the attention economy. For instance, what Brave's doing with disrupting the advertising industry with Brave browser and paying the consumers directly who choose to visit ads in the browser. There's a lot of potential for that. And we're just in the beginning of the attention economy. And it's absolutely important that we take the moment and we seize this to take charge of our own future. Because in the book, we go back, this is the first time in history since the 1600s where we can have true ownership. And we go a lot into the historical, record for that. But it's absolutely imperative. I don't believe at all we can rely on governments because they're not going to do it. They're going to want a backdoor.
Exactly.
Yeah, they're going to want to be able to see everything. And, you know, the old adage, we talk about this, when it's a free service, you're the product. You know,
and at this point, we should actually bring up DG Assets, which is something that also you have been working on for quite a long time, and it is basically changing the way to see, for example, your own data and your own identity. It becomes an asset that you can trade, you can, you know, it's got a value.
Yeah. I mean, people think of digital assets as just simply, you know, cryptocurrency or stocks and bonds and other stuff like that, but that's far from it. I mean, you know, our digital assets are our most important data and information that, one, we don't want to lose. I mean, maybe it's pictures of our children, or maybe it's, you know, our grades or diploma from high school and college. You know, all that stuff's important, you know, and who we are as a person is becoming more and more and more digital, you know, and we have all these issues with identity theft and identity fraud, because the reality is you have all these centralized points of failure that are storing millions and millions of customers' data, and they're being hacked all the time, and it's getting worse and worse and worse. It's not going to get better. I mean, there's several fundamental flaws with the current architecture of the internet. I mean, we explain it like this. You know, if you imagine a bridge that was built in the early 1900s, that was made out of wood, maybe on some loose rocks and gravel. But over time, you know, they covered it with some metal siding and they put asphalt down, and, you know, they made it look modern. They gave it a good paint job. But underneath, it's still that old, rotting, decaying infrastructure. But that's how the internet functions today, because a lot of the technology that it was built on, that is the foundation, was built in the 1960s and 70s. And the computing power at the time was, you know, a fraction of what it is today. So those systems had to be able to run on very old, antiquated, inefficient hardware. But that's still the foundation layer for the entire tech stack that we know as the internet today.
You mentioned about blockchain democracy, which was really interesting. Do you see there are lots of companies that are making investment in smart cities, so new city, completely new city, where everything will be tokenized. Do you see blockchain democracy being an element underpinning the smart city concept?
Oh, absolutely, 100%. I mean, not only from a cybersecurity perspective, but from an economics perspective and a trading perspective. The only way to really track, you know, small-time purchases effectively in real time and to tokenize things, for sure. Yeah, I mean, absolutely. But, you know, when we talk more about blockchain democracy, we talk more about, for instance, voting systems, using a blockchain to vote, or tracking campaign contributions to political candidates and seeing how they actually spend the money. Accountability for government organizations, where they're spending the money, what they're using, what people are doing, using blockchain records for that. As well as, you know, like decentralized autonomous organizations, you know, effectively creating governing systems where the people directly govern whatever it is that needs to be governed, and they directly have an input and a voice, and there is no intermediary. So, okay. Yeah, we have a whole chapter on that.
And then, you know, birth certificate. Many people don't have an identity, particularly in countries like
right.
India, Africa, and then also property
yeah, land titles, registration. I mean, even in the United States, you know, considered the most advanced system out there, it's very antiquated the way property titles are handled, and it's a complete disaster.
But do you think in the US, maybe the government is going to implement blockchain for voting as one of the first things? I mean, there are so many things about fake news and you know, Putin's manipulation by social media, and you know, Trump's is not really helping with his, you know, with his campaign, which, you know, is just trying to make the most out of what is there. You know, nothing wrong with that. But do you think that might be something that actually we should expect quite soon? Actually, a party or a government coming out and say, right now we have implemented blockchain just to tackle this problem about fake news and political ads.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely something I know that's being looked at, you know, but at the end of the day, the question becomes, who is the ultimate decision maker on what's fake news, what's not fake news, And what we see happening is very scary in the United States, where, you know, one side thinks they're right and the other side's wrong, so they're censoring the other side. And that's very dangerous. So, you know, I really look at blockchain as being a key technology against censorship resistance and the protection of free speech, because it is very disturbing what you see the large social media giants doing in the United States. You know, I'm sure they think that they're doing things in the best interest and they're right, but you know, at the same time, you know, it's their opinion, it's their perspective. Does that mean it's right? Does that mean it's wrong? Well, if the majority of Americans disagree with them, I would disagree with their approach. And it's a slippery slope and it's scary. And I think it's going to get worse. I mean, we have the emergence of a technocracy where a handful of corporate global elites are trying to dictate and control everything we see, everything we do, everything we eat. And I, for one, don't like that. And that's why I've, you know, committed and dedicated my life to blockchain technology.
Okay, Jared, this chat was really, really good and very informative. Before, you know, I let you go, I just wanted maybe you to share anything further about DigiByte project and what we can expect in the coming times.
You know, well, we've got a lot of fascinating use cases and people and groups and companies and even governments that are looking at things like DigiID and also DigiAssets. So it's absolutely been amazing to watch the community grow this last 12 months. You know, DigiByte was never an ICO. It's completely decentralized. There's a super passionate community out there. So if somebody's watching this for the first time, like, we absolutely warmly welcome you into the community.
I saw also the DigiByte Foundation is got started as well, which is great.
Yes, yeah. There's a group of awesome community members that are starting that in the Netherlands. I myself do not have any part of it. You know, we all decided that it's best, and I'm not affiliated with it in the interest of true decentralization.
Exactly.
You know, because I'm not the CEO. I'm not. You know, I'm just the founder. But I'm just a small part of a much bigger community and ecosystem now. So yeah, excited to see what they do. You know, and just to clarify there, they don't govern or control DigiByte. They're there to support and build and be a liaison and relations, you know, point to help out adoption. You know, that's what they're there for. But yeah, it's a very fascinating time. You know, it's been a little rough with the bear market, but overall, you know, we've been blown away with how much development and activity. There's been more activity and stuff happening in the last 6 months than there probably has the last 6 years. So it's absolutely fantastic.
Yeah, exactly. So lots of things to expect, basically.
Yes, for sure.
Okay, Jared, thank you very much for your time. Just last thing. So, what about the book? You know, where people can buy it. So, if you can just maybe explain that a little bit more, so just to make it easy for people.
Yeah, just go to blockchain2035.com and then you'll be able to see it there. So as you can see there, we go into all those different subjects: geopolitics, artificial intelligence, cryptography, cybersecurity, and then we talk about blockchain democracy, you know, the future of using blockchain for government applications. So, you know, it's a very dynamic book, but yeah, go to blockchain2035.com. From there, there's links to get the paperback on Amazon. You can get the ebook, or you can actually order the hardcover.
Okay, and the hardcover will be signed by yourself.
Yeah, yep, we can do that. That's the only ones we actually have, and then we ship out ourselves.
Okay, Jared, thank you for everything. For everything, it was a pleasure having you on the show. So I wish you all the best with the book. I incentivize people to go and visit the website, download a copy, or even better, get the book signed by yourself, which you know, you will have a great value in the future, and even now as things are improving at DigiByte.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me on. It was fantastic.
Thanks, Jared.